professional archaeologist and completed her education at the University. All right. So Dina Bird is our speaker today, and she's a registered professional archaeologist and completed her education at the University of Oklahoma and Illinois State University. She serves in the NAGPRA, which means, where is it? It's not even here. She serves in the NAGPRA liaison coordinator for the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, and currently is working with several institutions across the United States for the respectful repatriation of Choctaw ancestors as part of the comprehensive nationwide search No Stone Unturned project. Dina works to educate youth on the importance of Choctaw historic preservation, indigenous archaeology, tribal collaboration and advocacy, and the healing acts of NAGPRA in the classroom settings across the country. She has authored several historical articles for a monthly column in the National Choctaw Publication, and Biskinnick, E.T. Fabrisa, I don't know this, on topics related to Choctaw community during her 6 years of service to her tribe. She engages in community outreach with a new project, Chaha Homesteads 1830 to 1930, examining archaeological sites within the Choctaw professional archaeologist, and completed her education at the University. All right, so Dina Bird is our speaker today, and she's a registered professional archaeologist and completed her education at the University of Oklahoma and Illinois State University. She serves in the NAGPRA, which means Did I lose it?
Sorry for that technical glitch. We were getting feedback from the YouTube stream, but we fixed that now. Clyde, I muted you to stop the feedback.
Erica will have to unmute herself.
Unmute. Okay. Dina engages in community outreach with a new project, Choctaw Homesteads 1830 to 1930, examining archaeological sites within the Choctaw Nation reservation boundaries. And Dina Bird values her time, what she has left, right? Learning new Choctaw cuisine dishes, beading, quilting, restoring her historic home, and spending time with her 3 beautiful children. I present you Dina Bird. Thank you so much for coming, Dina. And I'm going to mute myself.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for your patience. I was having some technical difficulties. They added some extra security. And so I was trying to get into that, but thank goodness I was able to get the link. So, let me start by saying, that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you. And I was able to get the invitation from Seth Fairchild today from our Choctaw Foundation. And I really have the pleasure of being here to share with you a little bit about what we do in my office, and then also what my role is as the NAGPRA coordinator, and then a little bit about my experience in working with government to government relationships in terms of some respectful consultation considerations.
Okay, first of all, we're in here and they make.
Can I share my screen? Let's see. Yes. Okay. Can everyone see it okay? Yes, okay, good. All right, so the title of my presentation today will be Building Relationships, Guidance for Respectful Tribal Consultation. And again, I work for the Historic Preservation Department, and my name is Deanna Bird. I think being a registered professional archaeologist really helps me in this work with the collections and kind of knowing a little bit more of the landscape and the language that they use. So just to give you a little bit of background about our community, we are from Mississippi, Western Alabama, and portions of Louisiana. And our creation story starts with Nenawaya. And translates into leaning hill. There's a cave nearby that we have a creation story that our creator made us from the mud of the earth and clay of the earth. And then the first people to emerge were the Cherokee, and so our northern tribes, and they emerged out of the cave and laid themselves on the banks of this cave and dried, and then moved up north. And then so on and so forth for the rest of the tribes in the Southeast, our Chickasaw brothers and sisters, and our Muskogee brothers and sisters, our Seminole brothers and sisters to the South. And so we were the last to come out and emerge from this cave. And when we dried, we looked around and we were very grateful to our creator for building this beautiful land for us and for our life. And so we built a mound in commemoration of this gift. And so we decided to stay, and that's how we stayed in this area. This is Naniwaya here in central Mississippi. And so we have a 9-state area of interest, and I'll get into that in just a little bit, but really this was our homeland. And so it's kind of gives you a little bit of perspective of where the mounds are in relation to Mississippi. And then over the course of many years, starting in 1786, there were some negotiations that happened. And we had a total land loss of just millions of acres of land over the course of the years, and the last one ending with Dancing Rabbit Creek right before removal. And so you can see that, you know, over time, like Ho, Buck, and Topa at the very bottom, the very early treaty there, that roughly translates into Choctaw is like the raw deal, you know, like they didn't get the raw deal. So we've been negotiating for a very long time. This is the Trail of Tears routes, and our GIS department and our historic preservation office do a lot of research to maintain these routes, to learn a little bit about them in terms of archives, because we really want to understand each route. We really want to understand which families went that way. We constantly promote that if you're in Indian territory, you have a removal journey, and it's important to know what that is. And so this right here is an example of all of these routes. Where they came through. And the later ones, the last one was in 1903 to Atoka, and you can see that over here. We have a larger map that shows, you know, which ones were by train, which ones were by steamboat. But this is just gives you a reference of over here on the, I guess it would be your left-hand side, all of our villages, and then Dancing Rabbit Creek, and how we just spread across the landscape. So in that, we really wanted to, you know, establish in cultural resource law and take advantage of those opportunities. We became a TIPO office in 2004. And we wanted to protect this. All of our homelands in Mississippi are very sacred to us. We're not there to protect these sites. So any construction projects, any roadways that are going through, housing expansions, we get notifications in our office. And so we assume the roles of the SHPO and the state for tribal trust lands, and we became consultants on Section 106. We also had the potential expansion of responsibilities with NAGPRA. And then, you know, this picture here is Dr. Thompson. He is our official Tribal Historic Preservation Officer who's taken over the role of the State Historic Preservation Officer duties within our office. And so we have a very unique cultural leadership style in our office. We practice some traditional kind of, I guess, guidelines as we go forward. So one of those is we honor our leadership roles. So we look to leadership for their guidance. And not just say our direct boss or our direct director. We go and we seek out elders or people that have been in that, perhaps in our position before. But we look for leadership's guidance in making decisions, sometimes on projects, and we consult them about their expertise. We also have kind of like that respect for the leadership chain and decision making. We also have what's called rotational leadership. And so that is an example of, say, for instance, our tribal archaeology program. Well, when we go out with her, even though I'm over a certain program, or even say our director is over the department, when we go out in the field with the archaeologist, they become the leader in the field. And so we recognize that expertise and that education. And so we follow their lead in that. It goes for projects as well. If someone has more experience in, say, organizing or working with an organization, we let them take the lead. We also have a traditional decision-making process within our consultations. And so what that looks like is that everyone has a chance to voice their opinion. Sometimes the meeting takes a little bit longer because we're waiting for that person to speak up. And sometimes it takes a little while for them to formulate their thoughts, or maybe they want to wait until everybody else has a chance to speak. And then once everyone's done, it's not a back and forth. It's not arguing. There is no kind of bickering in the meetings. And so sometimes when we come to the table with consultation with government to government relationships, and we're trying to build that, that's one of the things that we do have to express, because there is this tendency to kind of talk over people and try to get your point across. And that's just not how we do things. So, and it looks like we're timid or that we're not interested, but we're just trying to be respectful of people's time. And then, as I mentioned before, about the subject expertise. So if someone's experienced in, say, Choctaw history, or a particular area of Choctaw history, like politics, or how the economics evolves over the course of removal to where we are today, we would rely on that person for their expertise. And we honor, again, their expertise from education and experience and all of their research. And then we have invitational task management. We don't just say, okay, this is due by Monday, you need to do this. It's, how is things going in your life, your plate? How's your plate? Is it full right now? Can you take on this project? And that's a really respectful way to understand, family and life obligations, so that that person is not just stressed out by thrusting that new thing on them. And oftentimes it's, hey, would you mind? I know you got a lot on your plate, but hey, can we pull in some other people so that we can get this done, but that it's not, just on that person. So it's in recognizing that there is other obligations. So, and again, it goes to that mutual respect. So in our office, we have mutual respect for each other. There's no kind of squabbling behind, the scenes or gossiping about one another. It's very much, I respect you for what you do, and you respect me for what I do for our tribe. And so we have that kind of united mission. And so this is really important to understand, because whenever you interact with a tribe, when you approach a tribe for consultation, it's important to know what's going on the other end. You kind of come to the table with some assumptions, and then this is how we practice in our tribal historic preservation office. So there is that natural conflict if you come in with different expectations. So it's always good to know. And just to briefly go into, our program, as I mentioned before, the Section 106 process is looking at those projects in terms of federally funded projects that are going to be ground disturbing in our homeland. It could be a variety of things, but, state agencies, the general public, federal agencies, and, these is Maddie and Lindsay Ballou, and they have these following subject matter experts. So anytime we get a call for a presentation, or somebody wants to do some research, or just somebody has something to add, they would be the ones that we refer them to for their subject matter expertise. This is our TCNS program. This is Vanjie. She is our resident elder, and she helps me with some translations at times, and she's a traditional potter, as you can see there. She's taught me quite a few of the Choctaw recipes that I practice, and so really, my son really loves her grape dumplings. That's one of his favorite. And so TCNS is the cell tower projects, and so anytime in our homeland that they get ready to put one of those up, she gets a notification, and she can review that project to make sure that, say a Choctaw village site or a burial site isn't nearby or going to be impacted. Then, as I kind of alluded to with the tribal GIS department, we take a lot of our information that we get from site files, from archaeological records, historical records, and we break it down into the coordinates and then make it into a pictorial element in our GIS database. And it helps us keep track of place names, archaeological sites. And this is led up by our specialist, David Batten, and his technician, Gabriel McCarty. This is our tribal archaeology team. It's led by Dr. Kristen Walczewski and her two archaeological techs, Kyland and Ryan. And they do all of the Section 106 within our reservation boundary. So if, say, a tribal member needs water lines ran to their house, to the road, they'll survey that water line. If there's a construction project, we have a new daycare that's going up near the headquarters, and so they had to survey that. But these are some of the other information that they are available to be expertise, offer their expertise. And so the Choctaw Homestead, we are partnering with them to go out into the community and document these homestead sites. We don't have hardly any information documented archaeologically about homesteads, that early life, and then what it looked like as it changed. So we're trying to get all the information and, again, use GIS to put it on a map where we're able to look at those changes through time. Did people move towards waterways at first, and then they spread out into cities? What happened when the railroad came in? And so we're trying to look at it in decade increments so we can see those changes over time. So it's a pretty neat project. We've got a lot of people involved. And then our community outreach program. And so this is Joe Wolf, he heads that up, and this is Jennifer at the bottom there. She led a team of traditional textile experts to create this skirt out of wool. And they hand twined the entire skirt. And so in our new cultural center, a lot of the mannequins are wearing these skirts that her group created. And it's the first time that technique and those materials have been together and that to create a clothing item in over 200 years. So that was a really neat revitalization project. Up top is Megan Baker. They're both getting their PhDs. And Megan Baker is the one I was referring to as a subject matter expert on our politics and, economics, the mining industry that went through Indian territory. And so both of them lead research groups. One of the one that's worth listening is called the Chachachasholi Talks, and you can go on our website and find those, but we bring in experts from outside our community, whether they are authors or professors in a variety of topics on Choctaw culture and history. And then Megan Baker hosts those. So it's kind of like a Q&A with them. So it's really great. We also have a cemetery restoration program. And so tribal members will identify a cemetery that is no longer in use. And then Skylar and his team will go out and they will erect a fence, clean it up, erect a fence, and then turn over the care to the family. And it's so that the fence, prevents any livestock from going in and disrespecting the graves. And then, of course, our NAGPRA program. A little bit about our project in a minute, but we have the numbers gone up since I created this slide, actually. So there's about 60 current NAGPRA cases that we're working through. And we have 7 repatriations since last year. With COVID, we weren't able to go and get our ancestors. And so we entered into care and trust agreements. But with consultations and presentations like this one, we're trying to spread the word about NAGPRA, about the compliance of universities, and encourage people like archaeologists, for instance. We do a lot of talks with archaeology students about understanding what their institution is for compliance. A lot of universities and museums are still out of compliance. The NAGPRA legislation was back in the 90s, so they're 30 years out of compliance. And sometimes it's no fault of their own. Sometimes there's just been a change of leadership or curation, and it's just one person and they didn't really realize that they had as large of a collection as they did or what the process was. So we guide them through that process, or we give them the resources and point them in the right direction. There's other times we talk to individuals about the potential of donating or supporting a university, it's important to know what their NAGPRA compliance is. If they're out of compliance with the law, there's likely that there hasn't been much tribal consultation, and these ancestors are still sitting in their collections. Their funerary items are still in the collections. And so we just encourage people to do their research before they support a university or museum in that way. One of the great things about us in the Southeast is, back to our creation story, was really honoring all of the shared ancestry in the Southeast region. And so the tribes that we've been working with, since it seems millennia ago, we formed what was called the Star Alliance. And so this helps us in our NAGPRA work, that we can approach institutions and museums with a united front, and that we can talk and discuss about this shared ancestry and hopefully have great conversations that lead to the repatriation of our ancestors, because all of us understand that we share that desire to have them ultimately reburied. So these are some of the expertise, subject area expertise that we have on the side here. So how I got into NAGPRA and really kind of entered into this, I guess I don't want to call it a career, I guess I want to say a calling, but how I got into that is I was in graduate school, and our professor had taken us down to a museum for museum studies course, and that kind of dialogue that goes on behind the scenes. And afterwards we were eating, and some of the graduate students, you can read the conversation here, and it just floored me, as a Native woman, as a colleague, having archaeological ethics, this just infuriated me that these conversations were still happening. And so I wanted to make a difference. And so it was interesting that things kind of fell into place, when I moved back home and was approached by our TIPO about an internship, and things kind of moved from there. And from that, we created a project called the No Stone Unturned project. And so what our aim is to research state by state, institution by institution across the United States, and find out where our ancestors are. And so they may not all be repatriated and find that final piece of a burial in my lifetime, but hopefully we lessen the impact of our children's children. Hopefully they won't have to do as much as we do. So what I do is I begin by sending out a research packet. And so it looks a little bit like this. This is our 9-state area of interest. And so this is, just kind of a visual map that they can research their database. It's pretty interesting the way that we approached it, because we have 2 different kind of simultaneous projects. The first is looking for cultural information. These would be items that we could put into a database called our Choctaw and Pona database. These are items like moccasins, bows, basketry, something that was made pre-1930 from artisans that had the original knowledge and original tools, maybe the original dyes. And so those are entered into a Choctaw and Pona database so that we can increase our revitalization efforts in our community. Say, for instance, basket weavers want to learn about a certain weave or a dye that they are unfamiliar with, or that they would like to revitalize. They could look at these baskets and then, maybe contact the institution for further information. So that's one aspect. And honestly, there's been a lot of funerary items that have been found in this search, because institutions, didn't really know what they had. So it's been a great kind of door opener for us. The other is this document helps them also look for any NAGPRA related collections that would be in our homeland based on the counties. They can search the counties, they can search keywords, and I'll just kind of flip through this quickly. But we offer archaeological phases for them to search through. Sometimes that's in the records. Sometimes the records are pretty spotty and they just have a location that says Southeast archaeological, but it might say Alabama River. And so then we can have a conversation about whether or not this ancestor is from our area. We might find collectors. These are the ones that we know that collected in our homeland and removed our ancestors. And so if they happen to, say, for instance, come across Peter Green in 1905, then we would know that there might be a cultural affiliation and we can have that conversation. So this is actually needs to be updated, but we've completed a couple more states since this, but this is kind of where we're at in progress wise. And the stars are where we're currently having repatriation discussions in terms of moving towards reburial. And the almost completed is going through institution by institution. So some of those will be gray when I update this map. One of the things that we advocate when we talk to universities and museums is, just our personal preferences. Every tribe is different. Some tribes believe in DNA analysis and photography and research. We, however, do not. And so it's important when approaching tribes and entering into consultation to understand what those treatment preferences are. What are those ancestral human remains, maybe how they're supposed to be handled and how they're supposed to be cared for and prepared for, someone to come in to get them. And so with us, we have a lot of consultation tools. We have, our treaty documents and GIS maps that I mentioned earlier. We have the research PDF, and we have traditional knowledge of our practitioners. I'm constantly checking in with them about the basketry pictures and trying to understand about some of the funerary items potentially, if this was a pottery style within a certain time range. And so we have a wild, just amazing team that we are able to go and to use as a resource internally for these consultations. And again, I mentioned the Star Alliance. And so this is kind of just a visual map of where everyone was at earlier. And so our frequent past a consultation, this is asked a lot, is an inadvertent discovery. And that's how kind of the project started, is that a lot of our responses were reactionary. We would have an inadvertent discovery from a project or a highway, work would stop and they would consult us and say, hey, we found some ancestors, we think we've hit some burial grounds, how can we move forward? And then also whenever an inventory was completed, the university or institution recognized that they were not in compliance. And so they put the resources there for an inventory, and then they let us know that, or they posted it on the Federal Register. So those were our two paths originally. And that's why we chose to take a reactive approach to really, kind of, like I said, go state by state, institution by institution that had federal funds. So one thing to remember is that cultural affiliation studies are to be conducted with tribal consultation, not by archaeologists alone. And so that's something that archaeologists in institutions will try to do all the research and then approach the tribes. But it works really great to do that ahead of time because, as you saw before, all of the slides and all of the expertise that we have in my office, we know our culture, we know our homeland, we know where we were from, we know the ins and outs of our community and our tribal history. And so it just makes sense that we would be a part of that conversation first, and that those cultural affiliation studies would be done with us so that we can offer information. That way we don't have to fight the findings and provide it later. Also, NAGPRA collections are not open for new research. So this is a problem that we do encounter where universities will approve, say, a study with human remains with osteological students that want to, say, study archaeology or disease processes from the past. NAGPRA collections are not open for new research. Just because they are deemed unique in the, lab doesn't give you the right to do that. And so it is against the law. So any study conducted on NAGPRA collections without direct tribal consent is also against the law. We are to know these are our ancestors. And if there is no cultural affiliation now, there is one that can be established. There is a descendant community that you can connect with. And again, as I mentioned before about, the archaeologists that we work with and the students that we encourage to ask if they're if consultation and permissions are gained for that field school. We've entered in some really great relationships down in Mississippi with the universities there, where the professors are contacting us way ahead of time. They want to conduct a field school, and so they're consulting with us and asking us if we know of anything in that area, if we have any history to share, and then also developing a protocol that says, you know, if we happen to find a burial, what would you like us to do? And so we have those conversations ahead of time. And then you can see some of the deadlines that we try to encourage people to follow at the bottom. Again, consultation is really important. This is kind of a pictorial view of all of the evidence that can be handed down into the consultation process by the tribes, by their leaders, by people in their tribal historic preservation office, elders, expertise. You know, and a lot of it comes from relevant information and oral history that is actually one of the requirements for evidence under NAGPRA. It's an option, rather, not a requirement, but it's an option. So you can have an expert opinion, you can have other relevant information. And so this just kind of gives a pictorial guide. I won't share all of it, but you know, with all of the information that we were able to compile, this is really what our homeland looks like. You know, between our villages, historical archives have given us information about these the hunting lands and techniques. And so looking at, just as an example, the river cane and clay sources in red. Those would have been where we got river cane to make our baskets. And so you think about the distance back to the orange, which is our villages. There's a lot of land in between. And then you think about the map earlier of all the other tribes living around us. There was a huge interaction on the landscape. And we are very familiar with that, both oral stories and archives, missionary records, and just going back and being having that relationship with our homeland today. So to have institutions and museums not consult us about this information seems kind of strange. So how does building relationships happen? So, you know, you can think about engagement, negotiation. You know, people say, you know, we should have a heart-to-heart, or we should have a conference, or we should have a reception. We should have, you know, we have to have deliberation and involvement. You know, let's have a dialogue, let's have participation, let's do all of these things. Yet there's one thing that's missing, and that's respect. And respect, you know, if you think about it and you kind of break it down for each one, you know, respect for me is that reciprocity. It's information sharing. You have information about your collection. I have information, like I had example, that I can share with you that helps us determine a cultural affiliation, that helps us have a conversation where both people know the information. The second for E would be establishing a relationship, a working relationship. It's not sending one letter. It's not sending a thing that says, this is when we're going to have the meeting. It's saying, what days are good for you? You know, and building relationships in terms of trust. You know, how does that happen? Keeping commitments, right? And then the S would be start before the research begins. As I said before, no new cultural affiliation study should happen without tribes. They should be a part of that conversation of, hey, we've identified some collections. We want to move forward. How is the best practice to go? What information would you like to share with us? How much do you want to be a part of this process? For P, I think patience is something that I encourage for the P, because you know, in our office, we have timelines. Right now, we're getting ready to open up our cultural center in the end of July, and it's been long overdue with COVID postponement. And so everyone is just super excited. Excuse me, my kitty. Everyone is super excited. And so a lot of our consultations and a lot of our meetings are very much pushed back because of this. Or we have to work around, say, openings and exhibit planning, tidying up those last little bits of information. So also, you know, it takes, in terms of timeline, it takes us a little bit longer, because once we get something finalized, say we want to sign an agreement, it has to go up to our leadership office. And depending what our chief schedule is, it can take some time to get that signature back. And so it's unrealistic to say, okay, can I get this signed by tomorrow? And what our timelines look like. We have a lot going on in both our personal lives and then also within our tribe. And so it's important to understand what those timelines are. For the E, I think it's important to remember that each Indigenous community is unique. Everything that I shared today is from my tribe, the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, but it's important to do your homework. Maybe it's completely different for another tribal community. Maybe they have guidelines, maybe they have roles in their community, maybe they have preferences that are completely different, or maybe they're similar. But it's good not to assume, and to do your research and reach out to them and say, hey, I would like to know a little bit more what your preferences are. How can we be better consultants? What would you like to see from us? And then, C is kind of hard to hear, but check your ego. I have a lot of interaction with some really wonderful people. I think the ones that kind of, are I guess, not negative, but a little bit more challenging, I guess, is when people try to show up and tell me my history and tell me what I should know. And that's always interesting, because I know that that's not coming from a place of real, true, trying to build a relationship. That's more of, well, this is what I know. I've gone to school. I've learned all of this. Here, I'm here to tell you. And so just come with an open heart and an open mind to the consultation, and to check your ego at the door. We're there to both learn from each other. And then transparency, finally, with the T, is transparency, just having that full disclosure of, I recently worked with an individual who let me know that there was absolutely no records. They were just astounded that there was nothing left behind. And so they were able to go in with their COVID restrictions every week, just one day a week, and just start taking pictures slowly through the collection. And so we worked through it like that. Letting me know that they only have one person, and that's going to be really hard for them to make, significant progress quickly, that it may take some time, and also being transparent about some of the older practices of how, say, for instance, our ancestors were labeled with Sharpies, just being upfront about that. Those are hard conversations to have, but it's great to just be able to offer that information. I know for myself, I know for our team and our office, we don't blame anybody for mistakes of the past. We're all learning, we're all trying to grow and move forward. So sometimes I think those conversations are pretty scary to have, but it's okay to have them. So this is something that I thought would be really interesting, and it's something you can request copies from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services admin, and it just kind of gives an etiquettes of do's and don'ts. And we're looking to potentially make this, Choctaw specific. As I said, every tribe is different, but I thought that they had some great, just some general ideas about what it was like in terms of building relationship. And I think one of the ones I wanted to point out was, let's see. Yes, like one of them I thought was interesting that also applied to our community as well, was not to point with your finger. So I think that that's something that, just in our kind of American culture, it's just, oh, okay, it's right over there. But you might see in our community, people kind of nodding with their head or kind of gesturing, but not so much pointing, because it's disrespectful. So it's little things like that, the little nuances of every tribe that it's important to kind of investigate. And I thought this one was kind of a great overview of just what they had come up with. You could tell they had done some consultation. So I guess, kind of breaking it down, the final little bit is what that kind of, how does that look like for people that are either doing consultation or wanting to get involved? And it's just really, when you have emails and correspondence, it's understanding, to cast that net wide. Maybe you have an idea of like 2 or 3 individuals, but maybe there's somebody else who really wants to be involved in that conversation, and allow them through your email invitation to tell you, say, oh, you know what, I'm going to defer to the other tribes, or thank you for contacting me, but I see that you've CC'd the right people. Sometimes there's some hurt feelings that are unintentional because some people weren't included. So I always recommend casting that net pretty wide. Also finding out who to contact. There's a responsibility to find out, especially with, formal consultation. And, we've had letters wrote to us just here recently in the past couple months to a previous chief. And so, I'm glad that we received it and not his office, but, just find out, who the person that's responsible for this correspondence before you send it. Again, inclusive consultation, finding out who is going to be there, if there's any cultural sensitivities, if people don't want to talk about something over, say, lunch. Maybe they have restrictions about what they talk about. Maybe they have gender restrictions about who could talk about what. It's important to find that out. And then accommodations. I think one of the great consultation that reminded me of this was in a university that was much like a maze. And so when we got there, it was very hard to find our way to and from, but she had provided us a parking pass. And so it was great to just be able to pull up right to the building and have a parking pass so that we didn't have to kind of meander through the maze of sidewalks to get to the building. And so just little things like that, especially if there's elders, making sure there's reserves parking, or if they need anything while they're there, a chair, for instance, if they're going to be touring, so that they have a place to sit down. Again, as I mentioned earlier about the timelines, just having all of that laid out of where there might be a delay. Oops, sorry about that. Technical difficulties this morning. Oops, I guess it stopped. Okay. And then also institutional. So, who is going to be promoting academic research? If they are, reaching out to the tribes for that consultation, if it's a simple paper, if it's something where, a student wants to engage with the community, we're all open for that. And so I think that that's important to build those relationships. And what that looks like is just, somebody says, I'm going to write a book, or I'm going to write a paper, I want to do a talk. Well, why don't you reach out to the tribe? I'm sure they have representatives that can help you with their history and help shape some of the ideas that you have. So that's all that I had for you guys today. I see that there might be some questions in the chat, so I'm gonna see if I can answer some of those. Feel free to add to that if you have any others. It says, when people do research, do the human subjects committees screen tribal possibilities and then improve the research? Human remains are human subjects, actually. So that's really funny, is that some universities have a no research on human remains policy, which is our preference. But they do have some sort of committee, whether it's, so for instance, someone that wants to do their master's or their PhD project and their research on human remains, they will go to their department chair or their advisor. Sometimes it stops right there. Sometimes they do have a higher up research or IRB or something that's similar to that. However, we advocate from our tribe's perspective that these are human beings, that they are in fact human, at one time. Just because their remains are there doesn't mean that they aren't an individual. And so we view them that way. And so we advocate for no research. Some institutions have fired back with, well, the statute of limitations or whatever is 50 years. And after 50 years, they're subject to scientific research. We don't believe that that's ever the case, simply because we feel like as a descendant community, we get to advocate for them simply because they didn't decide. Maybe if they were here, they would, offer into an agreement and say, yes, when I'm gone, I would like to offer myself for scientific research, but they never got that opportunity. So our answer across the board is no. The next one says, losing part of your ancestral land is like having an amputation of part of your body, and body has a memory, so does the land. How do you deal with that? That's really interesting. It's something that I think is individual for every person, but we as a tribe and as a community, as a department, all the way down, are really cognizant of that. And so we do a lot of programming that's land-based focused, that is rebuilding that relationship, right? Staying connected. And we're starting to see more and more of those programs. One of the ones that we have right now in our community that our office is working with is called Growing Hope. And we are saving ancestral seeds from our homeland. We're propagating them, growing them to full, and then saving the seeds every year in our greenhouse. And then tribal members can call in a request for those seeds for their personal garden all over, from, not just in Oklahoma, but all over. And then that way they can have that small connection to the land as they grow those ancestral seeds. So that's one way. Another way is that we are encouraging all of our youth to have a relationship with the land, to build that relationship with the land, whether that's fishing or hunting or, medicine procurement. We have a youth immersion camp. I'm excited that now some COVID restrictions are lifting. We can start planning for next year. But we do take selected youth from our community that have been identified by, say, their sports coach or teachers, maybe their district leaders, and they're between the ages of like 16 and 19. And they've been identified, but we spent a whole week in the Indigenous immersion camp, and we go down to our homeland. We go to archaeological sites. We do traditional cooking, the clay baked fish and the earth ovens. We go to sacred sites, and it's just a really enriching relationship. And then to help them kind of just, I want to say boot camp, but it's like just a full immersion in their homeland. And interacting with, spiritual leaders and experts in their field that can really help them feel connected. And then the idea is that they take that knowledge and then they go back into their community and they share that with their family and their siblings and their, students in their community. But we've done it for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's a joy to see all of the participants and how successful they are and how they're going and finishing their school, and they've got jobs and they're part of their communities, and being close to all of them still, you can tell, and they've told me, point blank, that really changed my life. And I think that it's great to do that. And so we encourage anybody to kind of maintain that and to have a relationship with the land. But yes, it is very something that weighs on our heart. And, as much as we try to repair that and to work towards healing that, it's something that, we're going to always pretty much struggle with. So what have you been able to do about repatriating remains of children at Indian boarding schools? Is this research that NAGPRA has done? So that is a question that's come up since don't know what this is, but that's okay. So with the boarding schools, I think one of the concerns for us is that, not all of the children at these boarding schools were from one particular tribe. And so that's a concern to us, that our preference is to leave them at peace. Other tribes might have different preferences. And so that raises the question of, how would you be able to know? Are there records? Is there any investigation that can be done without removing them? And so we do know of some boarding schools that are out of state, but most of ours that we have within our reservation boundaries, we have good kind of idea where they are, even though there's no building, still erected, and we have pretty good records from that time period. But as far as our preference is to, for those children that are there, rather than trying to reunite them with home communities and home cemeteries, we let them, stay there at their final resting place rather than move them. Perfect example is, and some of this was already done prior to, even NAGPRA or modern history. I was reading an archive when I was approached from an organization that ran a cemetery at a boarding school up north, and they had identified a Choctaw student. And so I just kind of spent about a month retracing her life. She was about 17, right around 17, 18. And she was living at a boarding school, and she was working for another family. And so she was staying there at the time. She had contracted a disease and ended up falling ill. And I read the research and kind of tracked, you know, the doctors, you know, visiting the home and things like that, trying to get her well. And then she did pass away. The next archival research that I was able to find was the receipts for all of the things that they had prepared her in. So they bought her like a white dress, they brought her, I think it was like a bonnet and things like that, and a blanket. And then what they did, instead of leaving her up north, is they made arrangements for her to come back to her hometown of McAlester, Oklahoma. And so she was sent to McAlester, and her family picked her up in her coffin at the train station and then brought her home to her home community. So when I find situations like that, when I'm approached about a boarding school cemetery, I do my homework and try to find out if that individual is still there, if they understand the plot, if they understand, you know, where the layout is. Because we do want to honor that there is a tribal member, you know, at a boarding school that has been identified in a cemetery. However, it's on our preference to move them. But it was nice to see that they did that for her and brought her home to McAlester. So that story had a happy ending. Says, what am I working on now? So right now I have, I'm preparing, I'm so excited. I have an intern that's coming. So he starts next month, and that's all he's going to be helping with is contacting institutions with me. So we're spending the whole entire summer. And so we're hoping, fingers crossed, that we can get through a few of the states that we're kind of have dangling left. And our goal is to be through many institutions. And even if they don't, you know, write back right away, at least we know we've contacted everybody. So I'm excited about that and preparing for him. Can you say something to those of us who to acknowledge the indigenous ownership of the land that we are now living or working on? What approaches have you seen work well? What could be done better? Again, with that, I've seen some efforts for land acknowledgement statements in preparing something that says and recognizes and honors those that came before. But my first go-to is to reach out to the tribes that were in that area and ask them and say, you know, what would be a good way forward? You know, what would you like to see? And sometimes there's, you know, a cultural exchange that happens. Sometimes there's friendships that are forged, you know, in that, and just kind of reaching out and just open-heartedly, you know. So this is wonderful and also very helpful. Thank you so much. We had to put hay up this morning because our water share is up tomorrow to flood the field. So you were on speaker and everyone listened in. Oh, that's good. Hi, everybody. The US government thinks it can take land by eminent domain. Has this affected the Choctaw tribe in recent decades? Yes, it has. And so eminent domain is kind of one of those sticky situations. And we really try to work around it. Unfortunately, I can't give you a whole lot of specifics because I'm not with the Section 106 and the tribal archaeology program, but they deal with that probably at least, you know, once every few months, where a project either for a tribal member or on a site that they're trying to advocate in our homeland. And that is something that's happened. So like I said, I wish I could give you more specifics, but I know it's something that we definitely try to fight and advocate for. And sometimes it has a happy ending. Not all of them are bad. We have a lot of good actors in federal agencies, both institutions, museums that really want to do the right thing. And so a lot of times if they can move something or reroute something just for that small area, they will try to do the best that they can. All right, well, I don't see any more questions, but if you have any questions, you want to raise your hand and just talk about them. You don't want to put them in the chat, that's okay too. Does anybody else have anything? It's like Gail. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
I just had a question about whether you use this technology when you're looking for potential burial sites, because I hadn't heard anything about this until recently, but this is not my expertise. And it is ground penetration radar. Is that something that all tribes use, or?
I'm not sure about all tribes. I know that we first gained access. I was just scanning some documents, some old documents, and I think it was 2009, 2010 timeframe, that we got a grant and we had some money reallocated to that program of cemetery restoration. And so they're the ones that will go out and do some GPR. They use it on a regular basis for their program, but if we do have archaeological sites that need to be investigated, I'll tell you a perfect example is that there was a pipeline going through a tribal member's property, and there were suspicions that the burial site that they had found on their land was much bigger. So they came out and they did the GPR and found that indeed it wasn't just one burial, there was, I think, 14. And so in that way, we were able to advocate for a shift in the project to protect those ancestors. But on a regular basis, yes, Skylar, our cemetery restoration project leader, will go out with his team and he will lay out his grid and just, see if he can discern if those boundaries are a lot larger. Oftentimes there's just one or two markers, or say a family member says, well, I remember my grandparents were buried here and here, but different communities had different kind of marking systems. So sometimes it was just a kind of a ring of cedar trees. Sometimes they had little footstones or headstones. And so he's able to go out with the GPR and look and see where that is. And then oftentimes it's a lot bigger than just those 2 or 3 small graves that are in someone's property. So yes, yeah, but I know that 2 of the tribes that we work with specifically have GPR capabilities and they use them on a regular basis. But as far as some of the other tribes, I don't know. Yeah.
Okay, because I did have a heartbreaking email this morning about 215 Native children that were in British Columbia. I'm trying to remember what was the name? Kamloops. That were the remains of 215 kids were found outside this residential boarding school.
Yeah.
And otherwise no one would have known unless you check.
Yeah.
Well, just
yes, that is a very difficult story, and it opens up a lot of wounds for a lot of people. I'm a boarding school survivor myself. My grandmother went to boarding school. And so, I know that, she never shared her experiences with anybody. She never told anybody what happened there. Every time I run into somebody that potentially was a student with her, I ask, how was it, and they kind of clam up too, but I know that they were friends. And so they talk about their friendship, but, the lasting effects of that boarding school experience are still evident in my family. And so, the loss of language for one. Her sister went home. She was 4 years younger. And so my grandmother started at 8 and my aunt was 4. And she was having such a hard time that her family came and got her. And my grandmother stayed. And so you can see that difference. My aunt grew up speaking Choctaw and my grandmother didn't have any of that language. So she wasn't able to pass it on or to pass it on to me and my children. So you can see just small examples like that. I won't go into anything more, but yeah, it's very painful for all of the families and descendants and all of the communities.
Thank you for sharing that. That means a lot.
So it looks like another question is language an issue? Did your tribe lose original language for a period of time? So the short answer is no. We didn't lose our language. As I kind of alluded to with the boarding school experience, there was a lot of language loss there for first language speakers. I think that with all of our programming that we have in place, we're on a good trajectory to have more and more second language speakers come on board in our community. In terms of high school, we have high school classes that are videoed into remote rural communities. So they have that opportunity. We have college classes, we have community classes. And so we're offering more and more programming. They have a website with all kinds of lesson materials where you can listen to it. You can download the workbooks. So there's lots of different avenues for people to kind of regain that information that their family has lost. But originally, no. So that wasn't something. It was probably the boarding school era that probably had a lot to do with that in our community. Do some tribes have more difficulty with maintaining government recognition and services? What are the prospects for improvement? That's not something kind of my wheelhouse. I don't really have a lot to say on that. I know that we have, we encourage consultation with federally recognized tribes that we encounter all the time. Down in our area of the Southeast for the Star Alliance, that's why we kind of developed an alliance of all of the federally recognized tribes. But unfortunately, I'm not really sure about what that process looks like or how to maintain that. We have a policy and government relationships department. And so if you guys are interested in that, I can get you his contact and you guys can share a little bit more about that. And I think that he does do a little bit more to do with like nation to nation and kind of what's going on political wise, like up in the senators and that kind of level. So he might be able to offer a little bit more information. Anyone else? Okay, where would one start for those of us who may have ancestors about whom we would like to learn? One relative is buried in a cemetery in Tennessee. Okay, where I would start is probably the county, that if you can narrow it down to a county of where they were buried. Then I would go to the courthouse or anybody who has those documents or archival records. Sometimes it's a county historical society. I know that there's one just south of us, about 45 minutes. And it's a little historical society. You would not think that they have kept these records by the size of the building, but they're awesome. And they have literally county by county cemetery records, and they have all of the plots of everybody. They have all of these records. And so that would be something, if you could score an archival mine like that, you could be able to look in there and do some research about potentially where your ancestors are. And then also working with local churches, sometimes that helps. They can tell you a little bit about some of theirs to like, I guess if it's an abandoned cemetery, they might be able to have records or have somebody that knows where those records are. Also, state historic preservation offices are really good. They might be having some information that you may not have. Yeah, that's where I would. Okay, Erica listed a website for us to view. Is there a way to donate? Let's see. I'm not sure. So donate to.
For that answer, thank you very much.
Yes, you're welcome. So Paula, what do you mean about donate? What is that?
To your cause. There was, I forget, it had letters for the Choctaw people, a website.
Oh, the Star Alliance?
Let me look. Sorry.
That's okay.
It's CHAHTA, Empowering Choctaw Life.
Oh, the Choctaw Foundation. Yes. Okay. Yes, there is a way that confused for a minute because originally Seth and I had conversed about this presentation. So yes, there is a way, and you guys can contact Seth about those donations. What's really great about those is that they're matched in full. So I know that, like say for instance, my eldest is 20. And so going to college, they were applying for scholarships and all of that. And so through the Choctaw Foundation, they match those. So if a donor, say, puts forth $50, they get 100. And so that's really, really nice for these students that are going through school and trying to develop their career goals and get their education, and then also using it for other projects. So yes, you can reach out to Seth, and I will put his name down here in the chat box. So you guys will have his name and you can reach out to him and discuss any of that. Okay, there he is. All right. And then how about religion? Were tribal people pressured to convert? I think that that's different for every family's story. I know that we invited missionaries in our homeland in the 1700s, very, very early on. We saw the value in education for our children. And so even at that time, if there wasn't a conversion, there was kind of this understanding that some of the beliefs were in line with some of our spiritual beliefs. And so there was that recognition early on. But as missionaries more and more came into our lives, there was a conversion, and that was different for every family. I think that, whether, you look at the missionaries, whether you look at the boarding school, I think there was some conversion that was happening. But whether I can't really speak to each family and each individual of what that conversion process looks like. So I know today that we are a Christian nation, and I know that we recognize all forms of that and beliefs. And so we honor each family and individual and how they choose to express that. And we also value traditional religion as well. So whatever people's spiritual beliefs are, we leave that to them and their family. So. All right. Does anybody else have anything? Contact information for NA, Lawrence and Carolyn.
Yes, the national organization. I missed the slide, so I didn't get that one.
Oh, yes. Let me go back over here.
The slide went by and I tried to scan it, that's all, and I couldn't remember the letters.
Yes. So I will copy that and paste it in here. And it is called just Culture Card. So I will put that in here as well. Well, one of the subject matter expertise that I have been working on for the last couple of years was our Irish and Choctaw connection through the gift of the Choctaw people to the Irish during their famine. And I researched a little bit more from a tribal member who had asked about how the donation made its way to New York and then over to the people of Ireland. And so I did my homework and I published this article that's been very helpful in kind of tracing that. And then I was really grateful to all of the work that the authors of the Famine Pots, Famine Pot has contributed to that, to my knowledge of that. But one of the things that I wanted to bring up and ask you guys was, in that research, I realized that into the hands of the Quaker community, and were able to bring that to Ireland and to their participants. And so that's always been a very near and dear part of the story, was that when it met the Quaker community over in Ireland, there wasn't any expectations. It was just aid. It was just humanitarian aid. There was no expectations for conversion or a day's worth of work. It was just, here, this is what you need. And so I've always just wanted to really celebrate that, that's really something that I've always held on to after that research. And so it's been an honor to do this today, because I guess just the value in that, and realizing in a really hard time, there was nothing there. So yes, Erica.
Deanna, there are some very special people, so many, but there were three in particular that I would like to just sort of introduce you to and see if they want to say something. Yeah. One is a very dear colleague, friend of mine, Carlota Duarte, who lives in Chiapas, Mexico, and started a photography project called the Chiapas Photography Project, and working with Maya. And then Buffy is also engaged in something with the pipeline. I think she's now in Minnesota. I can't keep track of her. and James Cheston, I know, is involved with the Chaha Foundation that gives scholarships. And so, having just said that, I want to stop being chatty and let those three people talk, and then anybody else after.
I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yeah, hi, I'm Carlos de Duarte, and I live in Chiapas, and started several years ago, almost 30, I guess, a project. I'm an visual artist, and I will talk more about this when I give a presentation. But the interest overlap many in terms of things you have spoken of, but about kinds of repatriation that are of a different sort in my focus, which is a visual, how giving people the tools and assistance of whatever sort so they can visually speak for themselves with text, titles or other kinds of text. Because in the history of, very likely the same in the United States, but in the history of in Mexico and Latin America of the conquest, the outsider was the one who represented indigenous people, whether in paintings, drawings, murals, and only in the early years, where to explain things to the conquerors were the native people asked to illustrate. And that whole question interests me of who speaks for whom. And our project is speaking for giving tools to Maya people. Only some, of course, the Maya region is quite extensive, but we've worked with mostly people in Chiapas, but not only. And so that interests me too, that whole question of who speaks for whom in whatever means, whether it's text, with images, with other art forms, whether it's theater, music, speaking for others. And I think it appears to me certainly very strongly that your organization has created that and multifaceted in a very developed program that you have, which is quite wonderful to learn about. So I would simply salute you for that. Thank you.
Yes, well, and I applaud you for doing what you're doing, because that's awesome. We started a program a couple of years ago about an artist in residence, and it's really about doing what you said about having our interpretation in that artwork. And so she's an artist that comes, a tribal member who comes, and she's a painter. And so she comes and she works with our historic preservation staff about, say, maybe a time or a story that needs to be told, but in the right way. And so she works with our subject matter expertise in that area and has done some really brilliant artwork that can be used for presentations. We can go into consultation now and bring this visual image because we had that kind of coaching and that shared intention all the way through. And so I love that idea. I applaud that. And I think it's really getting those youngsters interested in becoming artists. I think that was one of the great things that she was able to offer a community was an artist workshop, and encouraging the youth to pick up those pens, pick up those paintbrushes, and not only express themselves, but how to capture those culturally specific things to our tribe. We didn't live in teepees, we lived in chocas. So how to do that on the landscape that's accurately. So yeah, that's really awesome.
Thank you.
Hi,
I know.
my name is Buffy Curtis, and I thank you so much for your presentation, Deanna, and for the invitation into the work. I appreciate that Erica brought my name up, but my partner and I, Lisa Lee, have been involved with the process of how to become allies and partners in the work. And it's exactly this kind of a presentation that we need in order to know how to proceed rightfully, and not just pick ourselves up out of that white process of, oh, we know what you need. So it's undoing all of those old lessons and learning how to do it. And we've had the great privilege of working very closely with the Haudenosaunee peoples out here in upstate New York. And I originally came from the Cape, so had some time with the Wampanoag folks as well. And Erica alluded to the fact that I was out on the road again, but I did just come back from Minnesota where the difference it made to have about 2,000 white people out there in order to bring awareness to a struggle that's been going on up there for 7 years. So the power of our white presence to bring up such old processes and such old injuries and ongoing injuries to Native peoples is a part that we must undertake as Quakers and as allies. And we can't do it unless it's done with Indigenous leadership, which this program was. This action was specifically Indigenous led. And there was a lot of education that went on about how to behave. Gratefully, there's a number of young people who are already beginning to get it. And some of us with this color hair have had the privilege of being able to do that for a while. But it's essential that we begin to step up and get educated and begin that process of walking as we did in 2013 with the Two-Row Wampum renewal campaign of walking side by side. So thank you so much for all the wonderful work that you're doing and for helping us become better allies. Thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you for your advocacy, thank you.
Deanna?
I know James was trying to talk. Did you figure out the mute?
Yes, I'm no longer muted.
Okay.
Yes, I've endowed several scholarships, Fairchild in the Chadha Foundation, it is the most wonderful thing that I've ever been identified with, and it's permanent, of course, because as you say, the Chadha matched all my contributions 1-to-1, so it's twice as much money. Students, it's wonderful.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you. I know, my students and students across the nation have benefited from that generous gift. So thank you.
Very, very small, but the need is just tremendous. And the letters and the very, very careful process of enrollment for it is just awe-inspiring.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Anybody else would like to speak? I know we're coming. Caroline.
Yes.
I don't want to take up any more time than the wonderful, wonderful presentation we've had. This has taken us to places we might not have gone and people we would not have seen without this vehicle. And I thank Erica so much. I've been following her work, but it paralleled some unfinished business of my own. And so where can we donate? Seeing and hearing Carlotta, putting all of this together has given a direction, I think, to us personally in our meeting. And I think collectively in our meeting. I am so grateful. My close friend up in Maine is Jamie Bassinet Louis. I don't know if you know her. She worked with American Friends Service Committee, and she's one of the main tribes on land. And Deanna, just am so pleased to know that you're still active. She's retired from that and doing this work. And we join with you, or hope to join with you even more. I'm very grateful for everything you said. You didn't mention Tennessee, but we visited a Choctaw village out of in Mississippi, over the border from Memphis, Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was my first experience in talking about that with those people. But I don't know, they didn't show up on your map, but we made a copy of your map and we'll keep in touch with the work you're doing. And Paula gave me also another reference that you mentioned. I was slow in writing today. So this has been wonderful, and keep up the great work. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And to all of you, if you have ever any questions or ever any need, please contact me. Please reach out to me or Seth if you need him to. You know, I can drop my email in the chat, and please shoot me an email and we can talk more. And then also, you know, if you make your way to down to Oklahoma for the you know, on your travels, please come and see us, and I'll give you a tour of our cultural center that's opening up to learn more about our history and our culture. So we would love to have each of you.
So if nobody else wants to say anything more, it's a wonderful presentation, and thank you so very much. It was
Yeah,
excellent.
Honor. Thank you.
I hope we maintain the connection, and we'll send you an invitation when Carlotta speaks, which should be the second Sunday if it doesn't need to be rescheduled.
Okay, and I will, if you don't mind, I'll extend that to our resident artist. She would love to come. So.
Oh, okay.
All right. All right. Well,
thank you so much.
Be well, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Mm.